Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Ravel. I'm a biology professor at Mount San Antonio College. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to study. I've taught thousands of students this method, and I've used it many times myself. I'm going to show you all the steps and then suggest ways to streamline it if you want. I find this method to be very effective for many reasons, but one complaint I hear from students often is that it takes a lot of time. But I find it very useful, and I find putting that time in to be useful for the results I get. This process of studying is exactly that. It's a process. I'm going to walk you through the steps, but keep in mind you're going to want to make adjustments as you go. So we'll start by thinking of your class as a game. And like any game, you need to know how to win the game. How do you score points? How do you get those points? Quite often in the courses I teach, you get points by answering questions right on a quiz or exam. So we're going to focus on that for now. But if you get more points or more credit for things like activities or labs or writing papers, then you want to shift your focus on those areas. That is playing the game wisely, which is important to do. Quite often we will get our points by quizzes or exams, so we need to focus on that, and we're going to focus on that part first. If you get more points some other way, again, focus on that. So we need to do that part first. Okay. We also need to separate learning from the game. Quite often I find students are studying large amounts of information that they're getting from somewhere else. And unless that's part of the game, you can learn a lot of things and not do very well at the game. So it's very important to focus on how you're going to win the game. Learning is important, but the game is important as well. So we want to separate those two. You can learn a lot of stuff in a class and still lose the game. So we need to keep that in mind as we're going forward. Now, if part of the game involves earning points from quizzes or exams, you need to know where those questions come from. And so I like to call that what's the realm of possibilities or probabilities that a certain question going to be asked comes from a particular spot. Do they come from lecture notes or reading assignments or homework? Where do the majority of questions you get asked on a quiz or exam, where do those come from? And you need to focus on that and put your efforts into those areas. When you think about taking a class or studying, there are things that you would do before class, there are things you do during class, and things you do after class. And my colleague and I, Dan Anderson, when we were working in the STEM Center together, we called these the pre, the current, and the post. And basically it just means things that you do, the pre, things you do before class, the current, the things you do while you're in class, and the post, the things that you'll do after class. As an example, I've recently used the same methodology for taking a sailing class and a scuba diving class that I'm taking online. And I use the same setup with the pre, the current, and the post. I'm going to walk you through those with some examples of how I do them. Now, for me, for the pre section, I might look over the reading material before class. I jot down notes. Mainly from the bolded words or pictures that are in diagrams. If you're taking a physics class or a math class, there may be homework you're supposed to do before you come to class. I would do that. And I'm basically just familiarizing myself with what's going to come up in lecture. Personally, for me and for the classes I teach, I would generally spend the least amount of time on the pre-section. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll spend the least amount of time on that section, but it's a starting point to consider. But again, this is a process. And so if the process that you do involves homework, and the homework's an important part, you want to make sure that you do that accordingly. For the current section, I would attend a typical lecture class and take lecture notes. I might bring in any pre-reading notes that I already had. But I try very hard when I'm in lecture to focus. I take really good notes. I take them as fast as possible. I focus on capturing the lecture notes as I go, because this is going to be a very important part for the main thing that I study going forward. So I need to make sure to get my notes as accurate and as complete as possible. The post section is by far the most important. So just as an example, let's say we've learned 2 weeks worth of material. So in a normal teaching environment, in a normal semester, 2 weeks of learning or teaching for me would be about 6 hours of lecture content that I would have learned in 2 weeks, somewhere around there. So for the for 6 hours, which would be like a little bit more than a quiz, but a little bit less than an exam usually, I might spend an hour or two on at the most. Then the current, which is going to class, is around 6 hours. But the post section, I'm going to spend around 12 to 15 hours on, maybe 20 hours on, depending on the content. So by far the most time I spend is in that post section, by, probably if you mapped it all out, you're looking at something like probably 70 or 80% of my total time is by far spent on that post section. So the first thing I do is shortly after lecture, after 1 day of lecture, within a few hours, if possible, I like to go over all my notes. I like to sit down and look over what I wrote down. And if anything's incorrect, I like to fix it. Either I use the book or the internet. If something's unclear, I'll look it up, try to fix it. If I'm still confused, I might ask the professor or go during office hours to ask my question. But during the post section, I need to make sure I clean up or clarify any notes or questions I have. If my notes are sloppy, I might even rewrite them all, which I often do. When I take my notes really quick, they are often messy and I have to go through and I clean them up, because I absolutely need, for the next part, to have very, very good notes before I can proceed. Also during the post section, I'll break these notes up into smaller pieces and I put them on note cards. And I think this is a very important key. Everything that I think that could be on a quiz or exam, anything that's part of the game, anything that's in that realm of possibility that I could be asked, ends up going on a note card. We often call this chunking in teaching circles, and allows us to group related items into small coherent units, and also allows us to break up many pages of notes. It's a little bit overwhelming. If I had assigned homework or readings, I might put some of that information on the cards as well. I might also put note cards from information that came from if I was, something I had to do in reading the lecture book before class. Sometimes this helps me go back after, if I'm thrown off. I can track where something was supposed to be learned, whether it was something in lecture or something from the reading. If I see something on a quiz or exam later on and I don't know where it came from, these note cards allow me to figure out maybe what I'm missing, which is important. Making the note cards takes a great deal of time, but for me, it's extremely important for my learning process. There are shortcuts, but I find I often don't do well when I take those shortcuts. I also like to make my note cards by hand. I put them on 3x5 or 4x6 note cards, and I write them out by hand. I draw the pictures by hand if I can. I see students these days using PowerPoints or Quizlet programs that do them for you, and those may work for you. I have my doubts though. For me, there's a learning process that goes on by making those note cards, so that part is key. Now, the most important point, I think, is that up till now, up to this point, I haven't even begun to study, really. I haven't really put any time into studying yet. So everything I've done so far is only organizing my materials so that I can study effectively when the time comes next. So making the note cards might take several hours or even a couple of days, and you need enough time to study. So you make sure you have your note cards done at least a few days before a quiz or exam, if not more. Making note cards the day before a quiz or test is not going to be very helpful, because again, you're just getting ready to study by doing that. Because the next part, which is the most important for me, is the output. So during the output section, I'll go through all these note cards one by one, and I don't just flip them over and look at them. I take one note card, I look at it, and I try, with a blank piece of paper, I try to write down what's on the back of that, what I'm supposed to know that's on the back of that. And I have to make sure I can write it. Often if I just try to think it in my head, I will flip it over and I'll just sort of assume I got it right. So unless I can write it, I don't think that I've learned it yet. So I'll go through all of them, all those cards 4 or 5 times. Usually by the 4th or 5th time, I'll have most of them down, maybe 80%, maybe 90%. Now, by that 4th or 5th time, I take the ones I'm missing and I separate them. I put them into a different pile. And I start focusing my attention on these. So this might be a day or two before the exam. So a day or two before the exam, I've made all my note cards. I've went through them 4 or 5 times, and there's 80% I know, 85, 90% I know. And so the ones that I'm missing, I separate those, and this is where I have to focus my attention. I might redo the note card in a bright color. I might highlight it. I might say the answer out loud. I might look at it and say it out loud. All these forms of using your mind to say words and hear words and to see them and to write them, all of these learning modalities allow you to tap into and build neural connections to a term or word that you're struggling with. And the reason this is so important is, and to separate these out, is you already know 80 or 90% of it. So you put those aside and you work on those that you struggle because you need the most work on those. And sometimes my brain just won't learn something. It has trouble with it. So I have to reinforce it some other way. So saying it out loud, writing it, putting it in a different color. I might come up with a funny saying or an acronym or something that helps me remember it, because for some reason it just won't stick. So I need another way to reinforce that. So after I've gone through all those a few times, I'll mix those cards back in with the rest, and then I'll go through them again. And so the day or two before the exam or quiz, I should be able to write them all down, 90 to 100% of the information. And at that point, I've done pretty good. At that point, I feel pretty confident that going into the quiz or exam, I'm going to do well. Now, the next thing that I do after I've done that is you go take the quiz or exam and you see how you did on it. Okay. And as I said before, this is a process. So depending on how you did, you're going to go back and you're going to look at your note cards. You're going to look at the quiz or exam. You're going to compare those. If you got 80 or 90% of it, that's great. You're on track. You look at the ones you miss, and sometimes you just made simple mistakes or you forgot things, and that can happen to anybody, and you don't worry about that. But if you missed quite a few things or you don't know where they came from, that's where you really need to do your work. Quite often, many times, I've asked a question on a quiz or exam, and I've sort of monitored this. I've watched students miss the same question over and over and over again. And they'll miss the same question that was in a homework, for example, and they're just not doing the homework, or something in the lab reading. So the really good students will come up and they'll go, where did this question come from? I don't understand how this came about. I go, that's a good question, and here's how you should know. This is how you should have been able to find that. And that usually opens up the ability for you to see where things are coming from so that you can correct it in the end. So that's my first video on how to study. I hope that's very useful to you. Use it, try it out, leave comments down below of what worked and what didn't work, and we'll try to improve upon this in the next video so that we can get you further along and help you win the game in the end. Good luck. See you soon.